Hey everyone, it's Debra at Laurie's Country Cottage. Welcome to How Tuesday. Today we're going to talk about this awesome little pattern called Braid Runner. This classic pattern has so many functions, so many uses. It's one of those designs that you can get done in an afternoon. I hope you'll join us. Braid Runner is a quilt-as-you-go project. That means as you lay your 3 layers together, you're actually going to be sewing through the 3 layers of the quilt, and you're going to be sewing the structure of the quilt together at the same time that you're actually doing the quilting. So there are some considerations to make when you are choosing your materials and for this project. Let's take a look at what we've done with this particular sample. Because the stitches are going to be visible on the back of your work, that are actually the stitches that sew it together and do the quilting, you're going to want to choose a backing for your project that is a little bit patterned or a little bit textured in terms of the coloration, and that will hide any little glitches that might happen in your stitches. You will also want to choose a thread color, at least for the bobbin thread, that's going to just disappear into your backing. When you do your choice of materials for your project, anything really goes. The pattern suggests that you use a color flow so that you sort of get a 3D effect, but there's lots of variation on this, and it really is open to personal interpretation. It suggests that you put a layer of batting in, and I'm just using Hobbs 80-20. It's going to behave very well and just lay flat, but give it a little bit of that quilted texture. The first thing that the pattern is going to talk about is your cutting requirements. You're going to be starting off with a square in the middle and then adding stripes or rectangles in a chevron pattern. And so I like to just have my materials cut, ready to go, and laying out in the order in which I'm going to use them. One thing I will say about their binding, the pattern recommends that you cut a 2 3/4 inch binding. I bring that back to 2 1/2 or 2 1/4. I just find that it makes the binding a little tighter into the edge of the quilt. We'll switch our pieces around and then we'll come back and get you started. I'm ready to prepare my backing, which is going to get attached to my batting. The first thing I've done is give my backing piece a really good press out. I don't want any of those folds that were from being folded around the bolt. I don't want that to be in there when I'm done, and so I'm pressing it out now and using Best Press or Acorn pressing solution to make sure that I have a nice smooth piece. The pattern wants you to mark the backing both horizontally and vertically exactly in half. So what I did was I just took my freshly pressed piece of backing and I just put a little 1/2 inch crease at each side on the horizontal run, and same thing for the vertical run. Just folded the fabric in half, made a little tiny crease with the iron. Then I was able to lay it out, and taking a ruler and a piece of chalk, or my chalk stick, I was able to make a marking all the way through, marking it in half both horizontally and vertically. I've done this on the right side of the back because I prefer to do my marking of this line with hand stitches. So I'm going to be hand basting this in a minute. But for now, I'm just turning this over. I'm placing my batting, just doing the best I can to center it on my piece. I've cut them according to the pattern instructions. This is where I make use of a lot of the little batting pieces that are left over after doing a full-size quilt. You might have a little strip of batting that's totally functional for a table runner like this. So I've smoothed my backing and my batting together. For those of you that prefer the fusible adhesive, this would be the time when I could spray my 505 spray on there and just lay that down and have it held in place. but I still am going to need those halfway marks anyways, so I just put mine together and I do the hand stitching to create those markings. I'll get this all done, I'll get it hand basted and show you the product when we're done. I'm back with my piece basted. You'll notice that I did mine by hand. I just worked from the outside chalk line that I had made, and I just did great big hand basting stitches all the way along. I like to use a contrasting color of thread. I did an experiment where I tried it with my sewing machine's basting setting, a stitch length of 6, worked great, everything was nice and stable. If I wasn't using 505 spray, I would definitely put a few pins in there though as I was stitching along there, just to keep things from sliding along. I also have my gray basting line going vertically. You might not be able to see that on camera, but it's there. Hand basting, yes, takes that little bit of time, but the advantage is going to be that it's going to come out very, very quickly when I'm done. Machine basting, much less time to do, but it'll be a little extra time when I go to remove that in the end. So you get to make that decision as to how you're going to do your project. The first step in getting this started is to take that center square that you've cut and lay it exactly on these basting lines. So that's going to help you keep this table runner exactly square and exactly in line and on grain. Every corner of my square has to match one of these lines that I've basted in. So I'm going to start by laying that out. And this will keep me honest. This basting line will keep me from causing my work to skew off to the side as I'm going up the banner, or up the table runner, because remember, all of the construction and the quilting is done at once. My first part of the chevron is going to be placed on opposite sides of my square. I have pieces that are cut exactly the same length, so let's just lay it out to show you what it will look like when it's in place. When it's all sewn and in place, my original square matches my sewing or my basting lines, and then my second piece of the chevron will have a corner that comes up and matches this basting line all the way down. That's how we're keeping ourselves on grain and in a straight line. I'm going to begin with my 2 short pieces, laying them on opposite edges, and it doesn't matter where you start as long as when you go on, you just remain consistent. So I could have started this way as well, it doesn't matter. I'm going to lay those out how they'll look, and then I'm just going to flip them over and lay them right sides together. I like to have both sides prepared and ready to sew and do it all at one time, because you're just going to the sewing machine once then rather than doing it twice. I'm going to place a few pins in here and set my machine up for a 1/4 inch guideline. Begin with a little back stitch and go all the way along here using a 1/4 inch guideline, end with a tiny little tack stitch, and do the same thing on this side. I'll be back when I've got that completed. I've sewn my first 2 pieces and I've actually turned this one over and given it a good press along that joint between those 2. This one I just wanted to remind you to make sure you trim your threads as you go along, because they will accumulate and make your work less tidy. This one then will be turned over and pressed, and I'm ready to put on the longer second pieces that are going to go on this. The one thing you have to make sure is that you're putting it to this top corner, to these corners that are heading out toward the length of the table runner. So again, it's going to look like this when it's done. I will lay it and I will match this corner of this long strip to this corner here. When I've sewn that on a 1/4 inch, this will turn and press, and the way you'll know that you're keeping yourself straight and in line is if this corner of the fabric lays right on your basted guideline. Again, I may as well pin and stitch the 2 at the same time while I sit down to the machine. This one will stitch, and then this corner will match this line going to this end. If you have a walking foot for your machine, by all means use it. If you don't, you will want to make sure that these pieces don't crawl along themselves by putting in just a few pins and giving it a little bit of side-to-side pressure as you're sewing so that your machine can use its feed dogs to work that in. Let's take a look at this when it's done. The second two pieces have been sewn on now, and I've pressed them over. This is what you want to check with every step of sewing on your strips. Make sure that the outer corner of the long rectangle matches up to your basting line. And this one is about 1/16 of an inch away, and I can force it there when I go to pin my next piece. This one, again, I'll just make sure it stays on that line as I go to pin on my next pieces. I'm ready now to complete the remaining 5 layers of the chevron that's going on by simply repeating those 2 steps. Sewing on my short pieces and then sewing on my long pieces so that the finished corner of the long piece ends up back on that marking. Remember to do it in the same order from the same size as you did before. These 2 sides were my short side, so these 2 sides are going to be where I place my short pieces. Right sides together. I'm using just a slightly longer stitch length, a stitch length of 3 rather than the 2.5 that I might normally use. I'm putting pins in to hold things in position because I don't have a walking foot. And I'm going to repeat those steps over and over again, short ones followed by long ones, until I have my entire chevron made. The braid is all done. Everything is in place, it's been pressed, and all my threads are trimmed. I even go to the back and do a little bit of trimming if there's any threads that have been left on the back side as well. My next step is to place my 2 long borders, inner borders on, and the pattern is going to have you cut plenty for this. And the only thing we really have to worry about is that you make sure all of these raw edges at the corners of these pieces are going to be covered. So I aim for that inner corner where those 2 fabrics are meeting, and I lay the raw edge of my strip in position, and I just do that. And I'm going to place a pin in every one of those locations. And then when I sew in the 1/4 inch guideline, it will just cover over all of those seam allowances and end up going straight down and bordering these pieces. My border is dark in color, and so not much of my little triangles are going to show through, but I am going to remove those little triangles even just to be on the safe side. If you had a light colored first border, you would definitely have to remove those triangles. So I'm going to sew this, and then I'll show you what that looks like when both pieces are on, pressed, and the triangles are gone. My 2 long borders are on, turned, and pressed. I also went underneath and trimmed the little triangles of the chevron pieces. I trimmed those off as well, just so that they won't show out underneath. Once my 2 long pieces are on, then I'm going to complete the ends. And of course I did the ends in the same order that I originally sewed those fabric strips. So this strip went on, pressed, and then this one went on. So all I have left is to do the top edge, and I'll be ready for my next border. This border is going to lay outside. The pieces that we cut for it are going to be long enough. I don't have to piece anything together. I can lay my first border on. Of course, I'll be laying it right sides together. Just make sure you come up here far enough so that when you lay this over, when the next piece comes on, you've got plenty for coverage. I'm going to lay that on, sew each one on from either side, and then repeat the process, this short piece and this short piece, and then I'll have the whole table runner ready to be trimmed and bound. My pieces are all together. My last border piece is on. Just a reminder, so that you don't have the show through of the pattern design, make sure you go back inside and trim off those little pieces that are sticking out. You don't want that to make a shadow underneath your work. You're tempted at this point to just cut this off and to get it out of the way, but I actually recommend that you leave that cutting until you're ready to use your rotary cutter and your ruler. You'll get a better job and you won't have to make any mistakes guessing about where that cutting is going to take place. Just an aside about color choice and your fabric choice, you'll notice that of all of my designs, this printed one is the only one that is a one-way direction. So as I was putting it together, I just wanted to make sure that all of my printing is facing in toward the inside. It's just a way to make a one-way design look a little nicer in your finished work. My next task is to trim this off right at the outside edge of my border pieces here, and then I'm getting ready to put the binding on. To do my trimming, I'm confident that my outer border is sewn on nice and straight. It's been pressed well. So I'm going to use my ruler along the outside edge of that border piece and extend that ruler right up through this angled piece. When I make my cut, I then have the perfect angle occurring here for my cut. I can do the top end. And you'll see right here where this piece has extended outward beyond that original piece that I cut. That's fine. I just made it so that I would be able to line up the outer edge of this border piece and get a good clean cut and perfect angle at the top of my table runner. I'll continue cutting this out and show you when it's all cut off. I'm all trimmed. I'm ready to put my binding on. The instructions say that you are going to diagonally seam your binding pieces. We spoke earlier about the fact that the back of or the instructions say to cut your binding pieces 2 3/4 inches, and then when you get to the actual written instructions, it says 2 1/2. So we suspect that's just a typo. It was probably originally intended to be 2 1/2 inches. Some people like to make their bindings 2 1/4. Whatever is best for you, you're now ready to diagonally seam your binding pieces together. I just take my right sides together. I try to avoid the selvages there, so I'm just pushing beyond the selvage, and I know that I am going to be stitching diagonally right from this point, this meeting inner point, to this inner meeting point, and so I've just marked it with chalk there to show you where I'm aiming. You don't have to mark it unless you feel you want to. When I've got that stitched together, I will have a seam that's on a diagonal. The purpose of doing the diagonal seam is to reduce the bulk that would be created if you had just done a straight seam. I'll get that stitched, trim it, press it, and show you what it looks like. The binding has been sewn on that diagonal seam. I've pressed it open, and now I'm just cutting off these little triangles that are left inside, leaving about 1/4 inch of seam allowance. You can see a little dog ear sticking out on the side here. I can trim those off, and I'm ready now to fold my binding wrong sides together, fold it and press it all the way along to create this single fold binding. When I begin to attach my binding, I'm going to notice very quickly that unlike an ordinary quilt that has 90-degree angles, some of the angles that are going to be gone around on this table runner are less than 90 or more than 90, and I'm going to need to just adjust how I do that folding. So as I lay these two together, I'm just going to start on this long edge. I'm leaving a little bit of a tail to attach it. I am going to join it with an angled seam anyway, so it doesn't matter where I start. It's all going to look like the same thing anyways. So I'm going to start here. I'm going to come to my 90-degree corner, and as always, I'm going to come to within that 1/4 inch. I'm going to fold my binding back and then forward again and continue on with my stitching here. I'm going to get this sewn all the way and approach my not 90-degree angle corner, my greater than 90-degree angle corner, and I'm going to show you how I fold that. Look at the 90-degree corner. I would have sewn along, I would have bent my strip of binding up, and then folded it back, coming in this direction, so that that fold is exactly even to my raw edge. That gives me the space that I need as extra binding to create that mitered corner and yet to still lay flat when it goes to the back. This angle is larger than 90 degrees. That means when I bring my fabric down and I need to leave a bit of space for a fold, I don't need to have as much fold there because it's swinging around that wider corner. I am going to sew on the 1/4 inch line until I reach the point where if I imagined a 1/4 inch coming up from this edge and a 1/4 inch coming down from that edge, there is a meeting point that I'm going to sew to. You can pivot and sew off right into the corner, or you can literally stop right there. When I do that and I'm ready to fold for my next turning of the corner, as always, I will take my binding and make sure it lines up with the edge that I'm about to come forward and down on. When I come forward and fold, I don't need as much space in here. So I am going to make that fold be just even with the raw edge, just basically pulling on those stitches that I made at the corner. And then I've left a fold, but it's not nearly as much fabric as I would find in a fold for a 90-degree corner. I'll sew it and then show you. Stitching is done. You can see I have just very little bit of a fold there between the actual dot where I turned and created that fold. And now I'm going to just continue stitching on and continue in the same way. I pressed it to just show you that when I'm done, and this on the back gets pressed in, and this gets pressed in, there's a tiny little fold there, creating that angle. And if you look at how much fabric is involved in that fold for this greater than 90-degree angle corner, and you look how much is involved in the fold for a 90-degree corner, you're going to notice the 90-degree corner needs a whole bunch more fold. That's why we bring it right to the raw edge. Greater the size of the angle that you're going around, the less fold you need because the turning is not quite so sharp. To finish your table runner, you would just continue binding all the way around, joining it up with the diagonal seam, and then you're going to flip that over and do your hand stitching. If your choice is to machine stitch that down, then of course you would apply the binding first to the wrong side and bring it over to the right side so that your machine stitched top stitching will look the best from the outside. We have a video at Laurie's Country Cottage on binding your quilts, so I would certainly direct you to that if you need some information about finishing your binding off. Your table runner is all done. You've finished your binding. I just want to give you a little bit of extra information about this particular pattern. You will notice that I did my backing all as one piece. So this original piece of backing is purchased as 1.5 meters or 60 inches. And of course, I need about 21 to 22 inches of the width of that fabric. When I go to cut that off, I have exactly that same amount of backing again. Why not make a second table runner with this purchase? So I'm going to use this as an unseamed piece, and it has the convenience of not having to do that extra piecing in the middle. The original pattern would ask you to buy 1.1 of backing and seam it as two 20 to 21 inch pieces. And then of course, once you've used that piece, the 84 inches that you get out of that are then going to be brought down to the 60 inch length or the 52 inch length of this table runner, and you've ended up wasting a little bit of that backing. So we've done a little bit of math for you to show you that if you are willing to purchase 1.5 times the amount of fabric for this, as listed on the pattern, you're going to have plenty to do 2 complete table runners. The original pattern asks for 7 fabrics and asks you to have a 6-inch square for the middle one and a 8-yard piece, which is 4.5 inches to cut these strips. But these strips are cut at 2.5 inches, so 2.5 times 2 is 5 inches, and if you purchase 4.5 inches, you're not going to have quite enough. So you're just going by what the back of the pattern tells you. Fine, you'll make one, but why not purchase that extra little bit and be able to get 2? So we figured it out that if you take the 7 fabrics you want to put into your braid and buy a 0.15 meter piece, that's 6 inches, you will then have all the fabric you need to cut your center square and your 6 braid pieces, and then of course you could vary them up, you could mix them up however you wanted using them, but you would have those extra enough to make the 2 table runners. Your borders need to be doubled in the amount of fabric that you buy, and of course you'd have to double the amount of fabric that you'd buy for the binding. In the end, you would have originally purchased 3.15 meters for the table runner as it's listed on the back of the pattern. But if you are willing to buy an extra 1.5 meters, which includes the extra little bit that you need for the backing to be 1 piece, and the extra little bit that you'd need to be able to cut 2 strip sets instead of 1 strip set out of each one, you're going to find that you have plenty to make 2 of the table runners rather than just 1, with the convenience of no seam on the background and the ability to mix up your colors a little bit and create 2 unique structures rather than the 1. I hope you enjoyed this Braid Runner technique demonstration. We think that this is a real winner of a pattern. It has been available for actually many years now, and Lisa and I both consistently make this Braid Runner all the time and use it as giftware. I hope you'll give it a try.